Hello everyone and welcome back to the second part of the walk cycle tutorial. So what we achieved last time was a walk cycle on the spot with our guy walking. We have some hip movement, we have some squash and stretch, and if you remember we offsetted everything in order to have a more realistic walk cycle. So what are we gonna do today? We're gonna concentrate on actually making this guy walking forward, because we need to understand the differences between when we do a cycle and when we want to make a character to walk forward, for example, in a scene. If we want our character to do something, for example, walking and then stopping and then making something else, today I'm gonna show you how to do this. So, in order to do that, the first part that we want to check in order to have a good walk cycle is to check the translate Z of every foot. So basically, so we can now open our graph editor again. So if you have it here, just press it and it will pop out. If you don't have it here, just go under Windows, Animation Editors, and then Graph Editor. So I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about. So if you select one foot and you check the Translate Z curve, as you can see, and press A on your graph editor to frame this, as you can see, it's not really a nice curve. So for example, the translate Y is the translate Z is the axis that allows our foot to go forward and backwards. So if you notice, from frame 1 till frame, I would say 16, basically our foot is going backwards. And what we need to make sure every time we do a walk cycle is that this bit of our walk cycle needs to basically the speed of our foot needs to be constant. If you notice here, we have these weird curves, and we also have still the spline curve. So we don't want this. We want a linear curve, and then in this bit we can just leave our is in and is out. So in order to do that, we can select all of our keyframe in the middle between frame 1 and frame 16, and we can just press delete on our keyboard. So now as you can see, we have a much nicer curve. And we can do the same with this one. We don't really need this one because the curve is gonna be pretty much the same. So delete. So one thing that we need to modify for sure is this bit of the curve. As I told you before, we need a constant speed. So we need to change this curve from a spline curve, which has is in and is out, into a linear curve by pressing the linear tangent button. So if you see now, the curve is straight. It means that it's going to a constant velocity. So our walk cycle now will be way much nicer, and also is going to be more easy to then now proceed with this part here and make our guy move forward. So let's do the same with the other foot. Maybe we can change our perspective view a little bit. Let's go into the translate Z value, and what we're gonna notice here, we have the same issue as the other foot. So what I would say, we can, as we did with the previous curve, we can delete all of these keyframes that make this curve a little bit weird and make the foot go and make it goes to a different speed, to not a constant speed. We're gonna delete these keyframes here that we don't need, and we're gonna make this part here which is the part that the foot goes and touches the ground, we're gonna make this part here and also this little bit here straight. So again, let's select these two keyframes here, and then straight tangents, and then as you can see here we have this weird thing, so we need to make these two keyframes here straight as well. But now if you notice, we just have a straight line and we don't really want a constant speed when the foot is in the air. So what we can do, we can select both of these keyframes, and if you remember during the bouncing ball exercise, when you want to move one handle, you will automatically move the other one as well. In order to move just one handle without affecting the other one, we need to break these tangents. So by selecting the keyframe and then breaking the tangents. So now they have different colors, it means they're not connected anymore. So again, we can move just one tangent, and we want to make this line a little bit as it was a spline curve. And again, let's do the same with this bit here and just select this, maybe just a tiny bit, not really much, but just in order to have, there you go, a nice, there's something weird happening. Okay, there you go. That's clearly, so basically if you notice here, our knee is going crazy. It means we exaggerated a little bit too much with this, so we can just manipulate this curve in order to make this movement a little bit not that exaggerated. Maybe I would say like this. And also, if you notice that some part of your walk cycle, if you don't like them, if you want to change them, we're still in time to modify them. For example, I've noticed that here, there you go, at frame 7, my foot is a little bit too much pointing the ground, and I don't really like that. So I'm just gonna grab the foot roll and I'm just gonna smooth that like this, just a tiny bit, in order to have a more natural movement. So as you can see here, it's definitely much nicer. Also, don't worry about, for example, we had that problem with the knee. Don't worry, it's just something that you adjust really quickly. You're not breaking anything. And I think we might have the foot a little bit weird here as well. Exactly, at frame 19. And again, let's just adjust just a tiny bit the foot roll in order to have, there you go, a better movement. So yeah, so we can zoom out. We can also go under show and hide our NURBS curves in order to check if we really like everything. So now if you notice the feet, as soon as they go backwards, they're actually going backwards at a constant velocity. That's what we really need in order to then have, basically, in order to not have issues once we grab the center control and we move it forward. Nice. So now let's bring back the NURBS curves. There you go. And what we can do now is to proceed with our animation and make this guy actually walking forward. So the first thing that we need to consider before making this guy actually walking forward is to have a rough plan on how many frames and how far our guy should go. So for example, I want this walk cycle 100 frames long. So I want this guy to walk for 100 frames. So I'm gonna set my timeline to 100 frames. So once I've done that, I'm gonna go back to frame 1. And what I can do, I need to decide basically a starting point. So what I can do, I can pull the center control at the end of the grid. So this is going to be my starting point, and I'm going to select the translate Z axis, and I'm going to key select it, right click and key select this keyframe. So once I've done that, there are two ways to do this. So I'll quickly explain you the two ways, and then we're just gonna proceed with one, because they're basically the same but just a tiny bit different. So basically, if you already know how long your character should walk, for example, I know that for sure that my shot will land at frame 100, you can literally just pull the guy, I don't know, forward, for example, like this, and then key selected the translate Z. And as you can see here, you have your curve here that I'm not entirely sure why, but this should come up as a spline curve automatically. So you should end up having this kind of curve here. So if you notice now, my character is actually moving forward, but if you watch in a better way, you can see that at the end is slow, and then it's speed up, and then it's slow again, and then it's slow again. That's why, because we have a spline curve with ease in and ease out. So in order to have a constant speed, we're gonna do the same as we did with the feet. So we're gonna make this line straight. So if you notice now, our character is actually walking at a normal speed. So I know that it's not perfect, but this is just to show you the two ways of doing this that we have, and then we're gonna go into details on how to make this this character how to make the feet not sleeping a tiny bit, because right now they're basically sleeping. So this was one way, and if we go back in until we just had one keyframe, I'm gonna quickly show you the second way. So the other way is to just go at frame 2 and just move your character a tiny bit forward, just a tiny bit. So you will end up having this curve here. And again, if it's not already linear, just select it and make it straight. And what we basically want to tell Maya, to make this character goes forward basically to the infinity, so that we can manipulate later basically the end of our shot. So for example, if I notice that I want to end my shot at frame 150, I'm still able to have my character keep walking forward. So that's why I think this way is it's more, I wouldn't say it's better, but it's maybe it's more elastic. We have a backup if we want to change our plan, which that's usually what happened. We can always manipulate later the end of our shot. So we can just leave 100 for now. And what we need to do now, in order to make this guy walking forward for the rest of our frames, is to select both of our keyframes, and let's go under curves past infinity, and let's put cycle with offset. So as you can see here, our curve, which is not really a curve, it's just like this line, is basically keep going as long as I zoom out. So it means that we have infinity space. Basically our character is walking and walking and he's not stopping. So what we need to do now, if we press play, is actually going really, really, really fast. So what we need to do now, we have to go at frame 2, and we need to modify this this guy here. So in order to modify this keyframe here, what we need to do, I'll quickly show you basically the process of this. So if we press W on our keyboard, so we have our move tool activated, we're able, by pressing shift and the middle button of our mouse, to actually change the value of this keyframe here. So one quick thing is, if we move this keyframe up, the distance between frame 1 and frame 2 is going to be less, so it's going to be closer. If we move this down, the distance is going to be is basically going to be more. So if I press play now, this is going to go really, really, really fast because I changed this. But if I move here, for example, really, really, really close, it's gonna go really slow. Not really slow, because that's the result we're trying to achieve. So for example, what we need to do now, we need to kind of play around with this keyframe here in order to have a nice speed. So I would say it looks to me still fast because it's leaping forward. So what I would say, we need to decrease the distance between them, maybe a little bit too much. Let's try out this. Still a little bit fast. So I would go maybe it's starting to look nice. So let's check again, maybe a tiny bit less, just a tiny bit, and I think we can be happy with this. Yeah, maybe too much, so a tiny bit more. So basically you just have to play around with this value here in order to have a nice speed and to not make the fit sliding. So for example, if they're sliding forward, it means the character is going too fast. If they're flying backwards, it means that is really going too slow. I think it's not sliding at all. So I think I'm happy with this. If you really want to be picky, you can maybe adjust this a tiny bit more. There you go. So you now have a character that is walking forward. So for example now, if I want to change my timeline and I want to do an animation that lasts 200 keyframes, I can change this value here, and if I press play, after the 100th frame, my character is still going. That's why this is the This is the method I prefer, because, for example, if we were doing the other one, we should have just set a position at frame 1 and a position at frame 100, and maybe it was perfect for those 100 keyframes, but if for some reason I wanted to change my animation, I should have basically lost time to readjust my value. So that's why this is a nice way to have a good result, because once you've guessed basically this value, you can just change the timeline whenever you want. So let's put 150, so it's halfway, and now we have our character actually going forward and is not sleeping anymore. That's actually pretty nice. So another thing then that I can show you, it's okay, so now that we finished our cycle and we also have our a root control going forward, what I'll quickly show you is if I drag and select everything. If you remember, when we apply the curves, I told you that these parts here are actually not keyable. So, for example, I can't modify these curves here, but there's actually a way to do that. So if, for example, I want to, at frame 150, I want to stop my animation, or maybe let's do it a little bit before, for example, 135. I want to stop my animation, I'm able to do that. And in order to do that, I'll show you a quick way. So, what we need to do is, for example, we can leave this control here because we don't want to affect these values here. We don't want to change anything here. So let's create a marquee box all over our character, and by pressing Shift, we're gonna just deselect our root control. So now everything is selected apart from the root control. So what we want to do here, if you press if we press A in our graph editor, what we want to do is to make these curves editable. So in order to do that, we have to select all of our keyframe in our graph editor, and then we need to go under Edit, then Keys, and then Bake Simulation. But before pressing Bake Simulation, we need to check our options. So as usual, I always reset my options. The only thing that we want to change is, for example, in here, we can either select time slider, so Maya will bake our curves from frame 1 till frame 150, as my timeliner goes from frame 1 till frame 150, or either we can press Start and End, and we can actually select our start time at our end time. So, for example, if I want to have my cycle until frame 135 and then make my character make another option, I'm able to do that. So I'm just gonna put 1 here, and then I'm gonna put 135. So my bake simulation is gonna happen until frame 135. So after that, another really important thing that we need to remember is to select our smart bake. So if you notice here, we have this voice here, which is sample by 1. 1 is the frame. So if we leave our options like as they are now, basically what Maya will do, it will basically put a keyframe on each frame and then basically just start to recreate our curves by putting one keyframe on each frame, and we don't want that. So in order to have a better simulation, we're gonna do smart bake. So it's basically gonna recreate what we did here, and it's gonna calculate a better way of smart these curves. And another really important thing that I forgot to tell you before is here, instead of putting start time 1, we're basically gonna put our start time as, I would say, the end of our cycle. So the end of our cycle is 25, so we're gonna put 25 here. So Maya won't affect the keyframes that we already have. So if I press, where is my character? It's already selected. If I press apply now, Maya will, as you can see here, is going through all of our frames. And basically what happened was we have editable keyframes until frame 135, as we said to Maya. So what we need to do now, we need to take off our curves in order to be able to make something else after this cycle. So we're gonna select everything again. We're gonna go under curves, post infinity constant, and then curves again, pre-infinity constant. And then we can also go under view and take off the infinity, which is a bit annoying. So now what we have is, if we press play and you guessed already what happened, our character is gonna walk forward until frame 135, and then the cycle will stop, as you can see. So if I go here, the cycle will stop, but since we didn't bake our root control, our character will still goes forward. Now I deselect the infinity thing, but we still have it. So this one will keep going, but our cycle is actually stopped. If you also want to stop the character, what you need to do is just include this control in the selection when you bake your keyframe. Otherwise, you can literally just go at frame 135, put a nice keyframe here. So everything now is now, as you can see, we have a keyframe here. And once you've done that, select everything, go under curves, post infinity constant, and just in case pre-infinity constant. So now if I press play, my character will literally stop at frame 135. Exactly. So for example, from now on, you're able to make your character move again. So for example, if I go at frame 140 and I want to move my body forward, I want to make this foot and the knee as well, so it's gonna go, otherwise it's gonna go crazy like that. Let's let the foot roll and change this value here. We're basically able to manipulate everything like we just basically opened our rig. There you go. It really doesn't make any sense, this, but it's just to show you that you can manipulate keyframes after you bake them. So now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna just stop my character and back a tiny bit again. Cool. So what we can do now is to, at this point, since we're not doing anything else after 135, we're gonna set our timeline to 135. And what we can do, we can create a plain polygon just to make our guy walking on something. So let's gonna go under create polygon primitives plane, and by pressing R on our keyboard we're gonna scale this guy as we prefer. You can do, maybe you can simulate a road, you can play around with this, and you're literally free to do whatever you need and you want to do. So after doing that, we're gonna hide our NURBS curves, and also we're gonna hide our grid. So if we press play now, we're actually able to see our character walking. If you want to adjust this guy a tiny bit, you're still able to do that. And once you're happy, I can say that this animation is pretty much finished.